that's why I have a hard time discussing this stuff, because especially when I get an audience of, say, 50 or 100 people, they're all different.
Right.
And I can't make one recommendation.
Well, I think that's just another testament to how valuable you are in this industry, because you won't give blanket statements. That's not helpful to anybody. Yet, we see all these things rising in social media. People want to be too accessible and too this and that. But you understand that it's not that simple. Everybody's different, and that's important. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the FIO podcast, the podcast where we break down the stigma that everyone has it figured out but you. So let's figure it out together. Today we have a wonderful, magnificent guest by the name of Stan Efferding. If I had one of these buttons working, I'd do like the clap thing. Stan, thanks so much for coming on our podcast today.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting. I've followed you for some time now, and your pursuits in powerlifting and women's physique and all of your stuff here, so it's great to be on.
Likewise. I've always looked up to you once I started powerlifting, and you were just doing it all. Something that I really admire about you is you're never just one thing. I remember when I first got into powerlifting, I started listening to Mark Bell and watching his YouTube videos. And listening to one of your podcasts with him was really eye-opening, because I didn't realize how much of an entrepreneur you were. I was just like, oh, that's Stan. He's, the strongest bodybuilder. He does all these things. But you've been just going for forever. You've been doing everything.
Somehow you got to pay the bills. Bodybuilding's a hobby. Powerlifting is a hobby. I learned long ago that it wasn't going to pay the bills. I always say that, what do you call a bodybuilder without a wife or a girlfriend? Homeless. So that's what I always noticed. So yeah, I had to work, and I had to bodybuild and powerlift on the side. It's been my passion for well over 30 years, of course. And so in order to pay the bills, and bodybuilding's not cheap, as you know. Just the food alone is expensive, and then all the time that it takes and discipline and all of that. So yeah, I've had some good fortune and some bad fortune in business. But it's kind of been an exciting journey for me. I'm 55 now, and I still think I'm that guy sometimes. I come in here in the gym, and I get together with these 20-somethings and early 30-somethings, and when I put my head on my pillow at night, I think I'm still that guy. But I come in here, and it's a whole different world. But I'm still learning too, is what's exciting, and so that's why I watch what's going on. When I came up in bodybuilding and powerlifting, we didn't have the internet, and so your source of information was the guy working behind the counter at Gold's Gym, and he was generally prepping for a bodybuilding show, so he was eating tuna out of a can and rice cakes. And so you would obviously mimic that behavior because you wanted to look like that guy. And nowadays, and we were just discussing this with your husband earlier, that we have so much great information out there. If you can, sift through the bad information. I saw this trend coming some 5 or 7 years ago where highly academically qualified, just brilliant individuals really, who also competed in powerlifting and bodybuilding, and were on social media talking about it. I saw that those people were eventually going to start rising to the top, and all of the gurus and the people who just make stuff up were going to start filtering down and kind of getting called out, which is exactly what's happened. And so I actually went back to school. I studied exercise science in the late 80s at the University of Oregon, and I've obviously competed and collaborated and coached and been coached and for a long time, but the science has changed, it's evolved. And so I wanted to make sure that I was providing accurate information to the people who followed me. And I made mistakes along the way, we all have, and things have changed and evolved. But now we have these fantastic resources, a lot of people who you've spoken with on your show as well. And I just think it's the most exciting time to be involved in the fitness industry.
It's so cool. We're learning so much every single day about breaking down practices that we thought, were standard, but now they're myths, and the whole don't eat carbs after 7 p.m. and your pinnacle of salt. Don't have salt. It's bad. It's bad for you.
Yeah. And that's kind of a mixed bag too, because I deal a lot with highly active athletes, particularly a lot of women that I trained back in the early 90s. The mantra then was don't eat salt. They would cut it out for weeks at a time. And that was downright dangerous. And of course, now I work with a lot of athletes, big athletes who, weigh more, train more, sweat more, and may even have a higher salt sweat. But I'm quick to recognize that that's a small percentage of the population. So the recommendations I make should be specific to the individual's needs and not taken as a broad-based recommendation for the general public, 70% of whom are overweight or obese and probably shouldn't be adding extra salt to their Pringles and fast food.
Definitely. And we both work with Merrick, which is a great company. I know that you're a huge part of them now, but they definitely told me, like, you have to ask Stan about salt. Just get him talking about salt.
I get, and reasonably so, I get a lot of pushback from folks in the medical community, cardiovascular doctors in particular, because sodium can, raise blood pressure in those people who are salt sensitive. And so it's hard for them to distinguish between the recommendations that I make for athletes from the general population. And so, I have had plenty of adverse feedback. But I get sweat tests done on my athletes. I get the Dr. Sandra Godick runs the Heat Institute, and they have a site, levelin.com, and they'll send out, you can purchase sweat tests, and then you can use those on your athletes. Use it with Hawthorne, Brian Shaw, Ben Smith, CrossFit national champion, Lane Johnson, the Philadelphia Eagles, sweat out 5 grams of sodium an hour. You have to design a rehydration program that sufficiently replaces that. So we do it with the latest science from the experts in the field, but I like to make sure that I address those problems if they exist. And Merrick Health is a great place to start. And this isn't a commercial for Merrick Health. Look, I used another provider for 10 years. I got blood tests done. I've had over 100 blood tests throughout my career, well over 100. And while I was competing between, say, 2008 and therefore forward, I was doing it on a monthly basis.
Wow.
Because I would compete in powerlifting and then I would compete in bodybuilding. And so I was just alternating from sport to sport. And I would discover things along the way. And, I reached out to medical professionals to help me decipher those tests and, manipulate things in my training or in my nutrition that could help optimize all of the things in there. And so I included that as part of my recommendations to all of my athletes. And Merrick Health was unique in the way that they were focused more on athletics and sports. I wouldn't say more, but they have that certainly that knowledge base than a general practitioner would.
Right.
And they made it more affordable, which was the big thing. I used to pay twice as much to get a blood test, almost $300 to get a comprehensive panel. And now they put one together for me. It was $140.
Wow.
So now price doesn't become a barrier to your having knowledge about your health.
Right.
And some folks in the medical community don't like when people randomly take blood tests for problems they don't have. But there's things you don't know and can't tell. And for many, many years or decades down the road, obviously, LDL cholesterol is a big one, especially for the big athletes. Hypothyroidism, very common, that you see probably amongst a lot of the women.
Right.
Anemia, iron deficiency, all those things I like to try and identify, because if you're working with an athlete, obviously those things need to be remedied.
You have to.
Yeah. So that's what's been great about working with Merrick Health, is that they've made it affordable, easy, online. So now I just have my clients go on and they get they fill out a form, and they get emailed a requisition that they print out and take to LabCorp, and then within 3 or so days, they've got a full panel.
It's
and
unbelievable.
Then Merrick can help interpret those. Obviously, I can make some recommendations on the easier stuff, or caution them to see a professional on some things that may be out of range, and we implement some protocols to try and correct those.
Do you work with a large, part of your clients based in bodybuilding, or do you have? I know you work with a lot of strongmen. What do you feel is like the most popular kind of sport that you deal in?
It's everything now, to be honest. Even Gen Pop. Probably most of the people I deal with now, we've had thousands of clients all over the world now that have read the book, participated in our weight loss challenges. We got one going on right now. Over 1,000 people entered through December 10th. Originally it was athletes, it was bodybuilders and powerlifters, because that's what I did. I did both. But at the University of Oregon in the early to mid 90s, I worked with the track team and the football team. And so I got to see a lot of those athletes as well. I was a high school soccer coach during that time. And then, after that, just started working with high school, collegiate, and professional athletes. And so now it's a whole group. Obviously, John Jones with the UFC. We're going down to work with Henry Cejudo recently for his next fight in March. Certainly strongmen, powerlifters, bodybuilders, football linemen.
Wow.
Because I probably gained and lost well over 1,000 pounds. And I think it's well north of that, but I wouldn't want anybody to call BS on me. But considering that I gained 30 pounds to powerlift and lost 30 pounds to bodybuild and did that, 2 or 3 times a year for a couple of decades. And I learned lessons at both ends of the spectrum. I learned what dirty bulking could do for metabolic syndrome. And I saw all that in my blood work, elevated lipids, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, fatty liver, NAFLD. I saw all of that in myself. And dieting down, and you see, hypothyroidism, particularly with women, this is more a big deal, but lowered testosterone, a significant loss of muscle mass and energy and strength. And so I experienced these things, and so I would implement protocols, both with training and sleep and nutrition, to try and mitigate damage, I say. A lot of what I do behind the scenes for myself and for my athletes, understanding that health and fitness is not the same thing.
Right.
Fitness is the ability to perform a particular duty or task, and the fitness level required to be a UFC fighter or to be a strongman or even a 14-year-old gymnast in the Olympics is not necessarily healthy.
Right.
And you put yourself through it.
Absolutely.
And you do a lot of things to reach a certain goal, and at some point it comes at the sacrifice of health.
Yeah.
And so a lot of what I do behind the scenes is try and get in front of that, understanding that about the last 30 days, all bets are off.
Right.
You're going to do what you need to do to win, and I understand that. But there's a lot of things I could do to delay, decrease, and recover from, the depth of what you do to yourself throughout that process. And so I've used all these resources, personal experience, collaborating with medical professionals. Obviously, the co-author of the book is a RDN PhD who is director of dietetics at UNLV. So there's resources that I utilize, just like in business. I hire an IT guy, and I hire an accountant, and I hire an attorney. They all help you, affect your message or your goal. And I do the same thing in this industry now because there's a lot of them. I refer people to a lot of fantastic professionals in this industry when they come to me, and I don't try and claim to be a jack of all trades. But those are great resources, and they can help. At least if I'm able to facilitate that for my athletes, then we just see a lot better progress. I don't know if that answered the question as to who I train, but it seems like that's why I have a hard time discussing this stuff because, especially when I get an audience of say 50 or 100 people, they're all different,
right?
And I can't make one recommendation, and so I have to. That's why my book had started to become hundreds of pages instead of at least initially when you work with a client, you want to give them a certain list of things, checklist of things they need to do. Well, the checklist keeps expanding based on who's asking because it's very individualistic.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's just another testament to how valuable you are in this industry because you won't give blanket statements. That's not helpful to anybody. Yet, we see all these things rising in social media. People want to be too accessible and too this and that. But you understand that it's not that simple. Everybody's different, and that's important. So, thinking of that, where did fitness start for you? Because you've been doing everything, very well. You've been really successful in everything you've set out to do. But where did that start?
Yeah, I always played sports as a kid. Since I was 6 years old, we were on a soccer team together. We had a European soccer coach, and so that was big, of course. And we all played soccer together and grew up in every sport. Like a lot of kids that grow up, baseball, basketball. I was never tall enough to do anything. My mom wouldn't let me play football, which is probably a good thing because I wrestled 98 and 106 pounds in high school. So I wasn't exactly the biggest kid in the world. Which
it's
is
hard
another
to
thing.
imagine you that tiny.
I work with a lot of young kids and parents from high school kids, and that was another thing about the blood testing and all, because back then we just didn't know. And I was hypogonadal. I delayed onset puberty as a result of my, what I believe was a result of, one thing is I had varicocele, which is a vein that doesn't drain from the testicles, and so it causes, for some people, not everyone, but it can cause low T. But a lot of the delayed onset puberty, one of the things I talk about when I work with young wrestlers and high school wrestlers, is just constantly cutting weight
Yes.
not getting sufficient sleep or nutrition. If your body doesn't have the resources it needs, then it may not release the hormones necessary to start to grow. So I was a senior in high school before I grew. And even then, as a freshman in college, I was lucky to be 140 pounds. And I spent 2 years lifting every day. I got Arnold Schwarzenegger's Encyclopedia of Bodybuilding, and I was working 7 days a week because I really thought you built muscle lifting weights.
Doing more.
Yes. So I was just lifting to build muscle. I didn't understand that you just break it down and that you build it eating and sleeping. And I didn't spend enough. Again, I was eating tuna fish and rice cakes because the guy at Gold's was eating tuna fish and rice cakes. And so it was way too much breaking down, not enough building. It took me a few years to flip the script on that. But in the meantime, I only got up to, I think, over 2 years of lifting. I competed in my first bodybuilding show. I was 158 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. And I didn't have to diet. That was just that was what I walked around at.
Wow.
I didn't do a formal diet necessarily because I was already eating tuna fish and rice cakes. I might have thrown in a little bit of cardio, which just made my legs even skinnier. But after that, I did meet a promoter, competitive bodybuilder, gym owner, he said, flip the script. He goes, train every other day and start eating more calories. And I was able to start gradually gaining weight. And then when I was 20 years old, I finally got diagnosed as hypogonadal and, of course, prescribed testosterone at the time. And that was a game changer for me. And that kind of put me on that journey where if a little is good, more is better. And I ended up ultimately, 8 years later, I was 300 pounds.
Wow.
And that was a lot of dirty bulking and gallon of milk a day, and it didn't look good. And, I learned all those lessons. I've done everything the hard way, and I always say to folks, if I knew then what I know now, what I wouldn't have put myself through was completely unnecessary. But those are kind of the messages I like to get out to people now.
So when did you start doing powerlifting? Was that around the same time as that you were doing bodybuilding, or did you kind of switch back and forth?
Yeah, it took me many, many years to get strong enough to powerlift because I was so small and skinny. And I always thought that the stronger you got, the bigger you got.
Right.
I didn't know that was a fallacy as well.
Yeah.
I just thought if I could, 3/4 squat a 500-pound bar, that I would somehow, my legs would magically grow. I had no idea about range of motion and all those things that we focus on now, frequency, volume, intensity, all of that. We just didn't have the same knowledge base then. We lifted, I grew, but I probably would have done a lot better. So it's not until about 1993, I think, as my first powerlifting meet. My first 3-lift meet, I think, was in 1994. I totaled 2,000 pounds. It was a big day. And again, that's because I was lifting as heavy as I could all the time as a young man who could recover from that. Mm-hmm. I was actually came out of the gates better at powerlifting than I was at bodybuilding, for sure.
Wow.
And even later in my career, I never had the legs for a bodybuilding stage against the monsters that are up there today. But I learned a lot training with Flex Wheeler in 2009. He wouldn't let me squat, bench, or deadlift for nearly 6 months.
Wow.
I'm not suggesting that everybody should avoid those movements, but it turned out for me that I was really strong in the glutes and spinal erectors, but I didn't have enough range of motion at the knee to benefit my quads, particularly at the end ranges. And so he slowed me down a little bit. People know my videos of me benching the 200-pound dumbbells, right?
Yes.
I never benched over 100-pound dumbbells with Flex.
Wow.
Because he would have me do a lot better range of motion. He would have me go really, really deep with the dumbbells and then slow everything down. So, and what I would do with the 200-pound dumbbells is I would crash them into my chest, and so I wasn't getting as much range of motion. But everything with him was kind of slowing it down, doing better range of motion, doing a little more volume, slightly shorter rest periods as well. We'd say under 2 minutes. Not necessarily ideal for everyone, but I was able to get more volume than I ever had historically from following Flex's guidelines. And that was when I won my pro card, was in 2009 my first show was 1988. How long did I keep banging my head against the wall to finally get a pro card? But yeah, you learn a lot along the way from doing both. I found that bodybuilding benefited powerlifting, but powerlifting did not necessarily benefit bodybuilding in any way. I still can't find a reason how that helps.
What is your training currently like? I know that you did that crazy elder abuse deadlift with Jake not too long ago. Is that what your training typically is right now?
Well, my training typically over the last many years has just been not to hurt myself. I'm, again, 55 now. And that's what I preach, and I know that folks watch me, and I like to say, do as I say, not as I do. But a few months back, maybe 4 months ago, CT Fletcher reached out to me and he said, hey, are you still deadlifting? And the answer was no, but it's CT. So I'm like, sure.
Of course.
And he wants me to come down in January and he wanted me to lift at his Iron Wars. And so I said, sure, no problem, I'll come do it. And then immediately I'm on the phone calling my friends. I'm like, look, I need help because my deadlift is really pathetic. And I think I went in and tested my deadlift and I struggled with a 600-pound pull, which for me is
nothing.
No, it's not great. I know some girls who do that. No knock on the girls. There's some strong girls. But, and so I just kind of had to start to develop strength. But a lot of the way I train athletes, I had to get stronger doing that with lower fatigue movements. So my two accessories were the box squat, because I found that I get less fatigue from that. And I do a good morning off of chains. And so I'm doing mostly the concentric and then crashing it down. And so I'm eliminating some of the eccentric loading. And I use that to build my deadlift. And I only test my deadlift once a month. I'll just pull a heavy single. I don't do tons and tons and tons of deadlifting to get stronger at deadlift, because at my age, I would just grind myself down and it would just be too much fatigue. I couldn't recover. So I came back like 30 days later and I pulled a 635 and it was hard. And then I went back to the box squatting and the good mornings and some glute ham raises and some belt work stuff, because it's lower fatigue. A lot of sled dragging. You just keep moving. As you get older, you need to move more.
Right.
Particularly a lot of building up a lot of GPP. Get your cardiovascular up so you can recover better from training. And I did a lot of the GPP under load, either with a recumbent bike or dragging sleds. And I came back a month later, 675 pull. And it was a grind. It was hard. It was everything I had.
Moving up.
Yeah, it was RPE 10. And I went back and did it again, came back, 700. Back for another month, did it again, came back, pulled the 725. So very gradually, I have been working up, but I'm only pulling once a month. And everything in between is low fatigue, focused on recovering from and preparing for the next workout. And that's one of the big things that I get a lot of older guys who have historically been powerlifters and they have a hard time redefining themselves. They always want to go in the gym and do the same thing they've always done. It's just like, it's not manly if you're not squatting a ton of weight.
Yes.
But if I get them to change a few things, they'll come back almost immediately within just a few days. Like, oh my God, I feel so much better. It's less of the super heavy stuff with the eccentric loading and more of accessory work that doesn't have the same gross load, but maybe we change the loading parameters to where they're doing more concentric, more hip loading from belt squatting, a lot more sleds, those kinds of things. A lot of that stuff is stuff that Louis Simmons has been doing for 20 years, 30 years. And so it's not new, none of it is. It's just a matter of, I think we convince ourselves we have to do the stuff that's more fatiguing for some reason, or somehow we're going to lose strength. Or but now we have more and more science suggesting that you can leave reps in the tank, you can do a lot of concentric work, and then just periodically test those things. I do that with athletes as well, mostly low fatigue stuff, because they only have so much physical capital, and you need to invest that into their sport-specific training, whether it's UFC fighters with their boxing and their wrestling and their jiu-jitsu. You can't be breaking them down in the gym all the time so that they can't, improve the skill set.
Definitely. And those athletes aren't bodybuilders. They're not powerlifters. That's not the point. And especially
they don't even enjoy it.
Yeah. And for you, like you were saying, you don't need to deadlift all the time. Being that specific isn't as important because you don't struggle with technique. There's not that much decay there for you. It's just building that back up again. So would you say that you enjoy that GPP training? Is that something that you currently
like to do? Yeah, I love it
because
it doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
I put myself through enough torture over the years. That's one of the things I look back on. It's like, I trained with guys who, Aaron Madron was an IFBB pro bodybuilder who was quite good. But I used to call him Mr. Intensity. He and I used to train together, and it was grueling. You would go in and, we would watch those videos of Ronnie Coleman doing the 315-pound walking lunges, and of course we'd want to try and replicate that.
Of course.
And it was horrendous looking. I got stronger, but I didn't get bigger. Aaron was a genetic freak. That's another thing to consider. I just had this conversation earlier. Genetics reign supreme. Right. And, Aaron was he had 21-inch arms and he was 18. As did, Jay Cutler, and as did a lot of guys who were teenage national champions. I think Jay said he didn't gain any weight from the time he was 18 to the time he was 35.
Wow.
He said that he just refined his physique, and but those guys were massive.
Huge.
And not everybody responds like that. And so you got to be cautious that you can get everything you can out of your physique, obviously, but we're just a lot smarter about it now. A lot of that work, I think, comes, thankfully, from Brad Schoenfeld. He's done an extraordinary job. He has a book called Hypertrophy something. Obviously, might have mentioned Brett Contreras earlier. These guys have put together a lot of science, and they've put a very specific checklist of items that I think everyone should follow, a science-based checklist or evidence-based guidelines for hypertrophy, I think is what they refer to it as, to keep people focused on what actually works, and also frequency, volume, intensity, rest periods. Just write down the list of a whole bunch of things that people, I think, should apply, because it is kind of a science now. And if you come in and do everything right, inside the gym, you pretty much got to get out, because you can't overtrain.
Right.
Is a lot of the problem. There's always so many hard sets you can do.
Absolutely. Yeah. Especially as we've learned, like you said, Brad Schoenfeld comes out with really great content. We're super lucky in this day and age to have access to things like that and the ability to even interpret things like that. Yeah. Whereas, when you started training, that stuff wasn't as accessible. So with all of the training partners that you've had and experience that you've gone through, the kind of training and hypertrophy that you give to your own clients, do you kind of make a combination of that? Because some bodybuilding coaches are very anti-SBD. Some think that it's super important to build legs. What is your kind of philosophy with that training style? They're
all just tools. If you can squat, if your anthropometry is such that you don't have these long femurs and you aren't all bent over, nothing wrong with that for powerlifting necessarily, because it's just about leverages. But for bodybuilding, you really do kind of want to get to longer muscle lengths. And if your butt's taking over the movement and you're not getting enough knee angle for the quad, maybe you want to get on a leg press and bring your feet in and down. Maybe you want to get on a leg extension and make sure you're going full as far, to your quad stretch as possible. Same thing with a lot of other exercises. Chest, I mentioned the dumbbells in terms of depth, and there's just lots of little things I think you can do that doesn't have to include squat, bench, and deadlift. I've never thought deadlift was really great for building muscle. The range of motion isn't terribly substantial, and very high fatigue. I'd much rather do lat pull downs and chest supported rows, because I could do so much more volume in a given week and not impact my ability to do other exercises. So obviously I love squat, bench, and deadlift, but what happens is, Dorian found the same thing. He was, at the beginning of his career, he would squat a lot, and he got really strong, and he got some decent size, but after a while, he started getting injured. And so he had to kind of transition into using the hack squat, or things that were a little less injury-prone, or things that made him take his glutes and back out of the movement so he could focus more on his quads. So those would be the kind of advice I would give.
Gotcha. And I love picking your scientific brain, but I've always been fascinated just by the person that you are. Like I kind of spoke about earlier, you've always been an entrepreneur. Where did that come from? When you were growing up, what you're doing now, is that something that you've ever fathomed? Because I remember listening to you on a podcast, and you were talking about, I can't remember the specific details, but you also worked in like cell phones. You were doing something with cell phones, if I can recall correctly.
Yeah, boy, it's a long history. My mom was a hustler. I tell you what, she was a hardworking lady. She always wanted to. My pops was a government worker. He was a smart guy. He was an engineer, and then ended up being administrator of Bonneville Power's Dittmer Control Center, which was their nuclear power plant up in Washington. So he was a government worker. He never made over $50,000 a year in his whole life. But my mom was always out hustling, trying to do, side stuff. And when I was just a kid, I was 8 years old. I was doing newspapers. When I was 10, I was helping her at the deli making sandwiches and cleaning up out back. When I was 12, I worked at 7-Eleven. When I was 14, she started a bakery, and I was come home from junior high school. I would go straight to the bakery afterwards, and I would wash dishes. And so it's always something like that. I've always worked. Through college, I managed small apartment communities for free rent, and worked at a place where I got free food.
Wow.
And so I was always trying to, and then did construction on the weekends for cash so I could pay tuition. And I've always just had a work ethic of sorts. And then I spent probably better than 10 plus years, maybe 15 at the end of college, working for other people, helping develop their businesses, working my way up to management, managing, staffs, And then I didn't start my first business until I was 35. But I had an extraordinary amount of experience, practical experience. I say that it's important in business that you have the skill set to begin with, some knowledge. And then I started my own company, and that was a telecommunications company at the time. And we just went and knocked on doors, and we're selling phone service, having people sign letters of authorization. We would switch their phone over, and we would resell the local carriers. And just out of my apartment with, 3 people would come over and work in the living room answering phones, and we would provision service. And we built that into a $25 million company serving 100,000 customers in over 20 states.
Wow.
Just gradually starting to be able to run commercials and then building a bigger call center. I had over 100 employees at one time answering calls. And then I because through college and thereafter, I had all that experience in multifamily property management and construction. I started buying small apartment communities, fixing them up, renting them out, and then we'd sell one and buy a bigger one. And we started converting them into condos and then started doing home construction. Had a pretty lucrative business in real estate, and then the real estate collapse happened in 2007 and lost it all. We had it was a phenomenal business. I had apartment communities in Everett, Washington, Linwood, Washington, Tacoma, Seattle, out at the coast there. Oregon, we had subdivisions under construction. We were building homes. Overnight, we couldn't get a single lender to lend to our buyers, and the whole thing collapsed. And I had personal guarantees on all that.
It's devastating.
Yeah, that's back probably when people saw my Cribs video with Flex Wheeler. And I was living in a $2.5 million, 10,000 square foot home overlooking the lake, and I had a Rolls Royce and all that stuff, multiple homes, and it was a neat time. But I figured real estate was a pretty good investment at the time, obviously.
Right, of course.
And it just completely crashed. Lost everything. Had to sell my home and sell my apartment communities in a fire sale, of course, just to get out from under the burden of debt. Back then, you could put down 3% on a multifamily property, and they would lend you the construction costs to fix it up and do the condo conversions to sell them. I don't mean to get too far off to the side here, but it was a fascinating time. In construction, you could put $1,000 down on a piece of land, and the bank would loan you 100% of the construction costs for the building. And so that's what kind of, obviously, debt you were exposed to at the time. And then they came back and they said, look, we need 80%, or we need 20%. Not only did the market decline by, say, 30%, so if you had $1 million property, now it was worth $700,000. Yeah. They wanted $140,000 back of that. So you're talking $560 was what they would loan. So you needed $140,000, plus you'd lost, and they wanted cash, and they wanted it now. And they were going to call loans. And so I had all my assets lined up, my homes and cars and everything. I'm just selling. It was a crazy time. So, what do you do? I didn't grow up wealthy. I just grew up working. I can always eat and put a roof over my head. So we started a new business, started an engineering firm. Because at the time, there was something like $4 billion the government had allocated to retrofit all the airports throughout the country as a result of 9/11. And so they needed to reroute all of the baggage claim facilities to go up through a special TSA screening. All that needed to be engineered and constructed and redesigned. And so we got into that business because that was the only place. The stock market was crashed, the real estate market was crashed. There wasn't any place to invest or work. So we got into that business. We hired engineers. We went and bid on projects, and we ended up started training and placing staff for the TSA. And after about probably a year of eating McDonald's every day, dollar meals, and that business started to grow and profit as well. So that was kind of our next venture. Did a few other things in there. Some were good, some were bad. And then, fortunately, with the advent of social media, I was able to start to monetize the information. I got more and more inquiries about personal training and about the information that I was talking about, probably mostly as a result of Hafthor Bjornsson's Iceland seminar, which now has almost 7 million views. People started wanting the information, so we put together the vertical diet, which is really just the culmination of everything I want my clients to do.
Right.
And it's not just diet; it's training and sleep, obviously nutrition, hydration, blood testing, rehab, and everything you can imagine that I get asked by my clients. You could ask a ton of questions, and you don't want to keep re-answering the same question over and over again. So you give them, I could just refer them to, and it's in this chapter. Now it's over 250 pages with over 200 references to peer-reviewed published literature, articles, and videos, because I want people to be able to go take deeper dives into all this stuff if they want to. I find, though, and you probably correct me if you don't feel the same, generally speaking, people don't want to learn everything that you know.
No.
They want you to tell them exactly what to do. Like, Stan, just tell me exactly what to eat. Then when you do that, of course, you get criticized that that's not the only way.
Yes.
That's not what they're asking, if this is the only way. They're asking, if you were me, knowing everything that you know, what would you do? And so I give them a detailed questionnaire to find out, a few things about them, because they are unique. What they like to eat, when they like to eat, what their particular goals are, any medical history that they have, and restrictions on training, et cetera, their schedule, we kind of commit to that. Those kinds of things. And then, I'll give them a very specific program. And then the biggest thing, and you guys, a lot of people have heard me talk about this, is compliance. So I go from information to application. That's the bridge that needs to be, the gap that needs to be bridged. And so then I focus a lot on how are we going to make this easier for you to comply with.
Right.
Some of the biggest things are things like satiety, obviously, if it's weight loss, or improving appetite if it's weight gain. Those are two of the biggest hurdles, depending on which direction you're trying to go. And then just finding ways that habits that you can create that you can consistently do over a period of time, I call simple, sensible, and sustainable. And just things like ordering meal prep or prepping your own meals and using a thermos to put your food in so it stays hot for many hours instead of lugging around Tupperware with cold food and then, discarding it and eating it at a fast food place. So that's what I focus on a lot. Obviously, like I mentioned, mitigating some of the health risks like CPAPs for people who have sleep apnea, the big athletes, the blood testing, and maybe some intervention for people who have the female triad. Things, all those kinds of things, just to make people feel better and make it easier for them to implement the plan. Because most people fail simply because they're either hungry or tired. So we try and fix that.
It seems like a lot of the ventures that you've gotten into over the years have come from your ability that you have to be a problem solver. It seems like that's a lot of what you do, whether that is the real estate or like the TSA, and now you have meal prep, and you had the cooler. Are you still doing the cooler?
Not doing the cooler anymore. Trump's war with China, of course, the cost of materials skyrocketed, the tariffs skyrocketed, the shipping problem, and it became cost prohibitive after a while. And the thing about selling widgets or gadgets like that is that you got to buy them all up front. They take 3 months to get here. You got to put them in a warehouse. You got to sell them to a wholesaler that then sells them to a retailer that then sells them to the customer. And by then, the margin's almost completely gone. So it wasn't as lucrative. And we tried hard. I got on Shark Tank. I partnered with Damon John. We promoted pretty heavily. Really tiny margins on things like that. And so I like the business, like the multifamily business. There's a recurring revenue source there. You call them cash cows. You provide people something that they continually come back for. Meal prep's the same kind of thing. Everybody's got to eat, and they got to eat every day. And so they order every week. So if you can provide a good product that they continue to use, supplements is the same way.
Right.
It's usually there's an advertising cost to customer that you bake in to try and get somebody to buy, but then you hope that you retain them for an extended period of time to be able to actually recoup what the advertising cost was. But I like those businesses. I'd rather, I don't want to say make money while I sleep than trade time for money. That's just not I wrote a book called Building a Career in the Fitness Industry that focused on a lot of those very same things, that personal trainers have a very hard time making a living.
Right.
And they shouldn't. We've got 200 million people that are immediately eligible customers from either overweight or obesity. 40% of our population's pre-diabetic or diabetic. There's more than enough customers out there.
Right.
I know we live in this little social media world where we think we're competing with everybody for the same customer, but there's so many people that have no idea who we are, that need help, and but you have to assemble a training style or program that allows people to get a more affordable rate, and for you to work with more people, get on a recurring basis. And there's some methods that we put together that we've seen are the most successful. Trainers always tend to utilize these same methods in order to make a career out of the industry.
Do you do like mentorship coaching coaches or business coaching, anything like that?
Yeah, I haven't had a chance to do. That's why I'll try and put all the information I can into the book, because I've traveled so much. I've done over 200 seminars in 14 countries in all 50 states in the last 5 years. I was on a plane all the time. So I'm never anywhere any extended period of time to be able to have someone come here and do an internship or a mentorship. But we do offer that through my business partner who I wrote the book with, Building a Career in the Fitness Industry. He owns a gym in Cincinnati called Beat Training. He owns 2 gyms there. Very successful personal trainer, has a staff, all of his staff, I think every single one of them makes over $100,000 a year in personal training. And that's exclusively what they do. They just help people get stronger in the gym. But we offer a service where people can go out and shadow those trainers. Or somebody who's trying to start a gym can go out and shadow Matt Whittemer. And he can kind of show them, it's in the book as well, he can show them, personally how they can create that kind of business. And that way, if somebody wants to be a personal trainer and they fly out to Cincinnati and spend a day or two or with these trainers, they can give them an idea how to do it correctly, including the marketing, actually the training of the people. But these are real coaches, training real people, collecting real paychecks, as opposed to the online stuff, which is fine for you and me because we built a huge following.
Right.
That's not necessarily available for most people, so I'm cautious. I would never recommend somebody not, pursue that avenue. But it can be a steep road. I mean, I was in, like yourself, we've enjoyed the benefits of a lot of publicity. Mm-hmm. I was in magazines and got a pro card and was on Shark Tank. I mean, it's a lot of things that happened working with Mark Bell and all the YouTube videos and stuff that kind of put me in a position that I think most people would have a lot harder time. Mm-hmm. Obviously certainly had some accomplishments along the way that helped build my resume, worked with some very famous people. All of that, it's hard to teach someone to obtain all of that.
Yes, of course.
They want to go to work tomorrow and figure out how they can, increase their income. And that's what we tried to do in the book, was just show them actual personal training, which I think is the most important. I've been saying this for years. The people in the front lines are the ones that have the greatest effect on the customer, not the medical professionals, not the registered dietitians and the doctors. And this bears out in the research. Those people are the least effective because they cost too much. They don't interact with the client often enough. It's those personal trainers on the front lines, and those are the ones that often get ridiculed. And certainly they should, improve their the information that they're accessing and distributing, and we try and provide that information for them. But nonetheless, they're the ones touching the customer.
Of course.
And they have the biggest
preventative
impact. Yeah.
That's huge. With everything that you've done, it sounds like you have this really admirable ability to kind of pivot from one thing to the next, and especially when you had that kind of disaster happen with all of the housing. How do you do that? Because I think a lot of people really struggle with that in their business, especially in this day and age of social media where everything is flooded. And you always have like such a good personality about everything. What is like your secret or your advice and being able to pivot from one thing to the next?
Yeah, boy, I think it just goes back to, you got to do something. You can't just, I don't know, when the market collapsed, and again, I've always worked hard, and I've never felt like anything was beneath me. I graduated from college. I was sweeping garbage areas and plunging toilets for 2 years before I worked up to where I was running a $100 million property with 60 employees. It's a process, and you have to put as much as you can into it and take pride in it. Anything worth doing is worth doing well. I have an 8-year-old and a 10-year-old, so you can start hearing me, repeat my mantras here.
It's important. People need to hear that.
It really is important. But I also say this, you can be great at anything, but you can't be great at everything. And so I'm not doing a lot of things at the same time. People thought, you're bodybuilding and powerlifting. No, I powerlifted and then I bodybuilded, same way Eddie Cohn did. He competed twice a year in powerlifting. And then in his time off, he would bodybuild. He would do single leg presses and behind the neck shoulder presses and a lot of rows.
He's a maniac.
But that's how he would build himself up. Same thing in business. If you've got too many irons and too many fires, you're not going to be, you're just not going to be successful. And so, and also you have to be cautious with the emotion, and it's hard. You pour a lot into your business, especially like with the cooler. I invented that, and I got a patent on it, and I went on Shark Tank, and I was like, I love this cooler. But the fact is that it's not a child. It's a business. It's a living, breathing thing, a business, and it requires that it has needs. And if you don't, give it what it needs, it's going to die. That's the business, grow or die. But at the same time, it's not your kid. And and you have to, at some point you have to recognize when that's not going to be a fruitful adventure before it buries you, mortgaging your house and, taking loans from other people, and you're really cautious about that. I always looked at it kind of like Monopoly. It's a game, and at some point you just got to cut and run, and start up something fresh, and it's just so hard. It's easy for me to say because I've kind of been through it, and I know when somebody's in it, like I was, it could be very stressful. Obviously, at a couple of different points throughout my career, I did a video called "Stress for Success," and it was based on a book called "The Same" by Jim Youre. And at a couple different points, I had started to feel some significant anxiety and stress from work. Maybe even call it depression. I don't know, but it was likely because I had not been taking care of myself. I wasn't paying myself first. And so what the book was, it said, look, you need to maintain a regular sleep schedule. You need to exercise regularly. You need to not eat like an asshole. And I'm sitting there reading this book. I'm looking for things like meditation techniques.
Like, I know all this already.
Yeah, but I wasn't doing it.
Right.
That's the problem. And so, some companies force people to take vacations just because they're more efficient, and they're cautious with how much multitasking people do because you don't do any of it well. And so I immediately, I was only sleeping 4 hours a night, and hadn't been to the gym in a year. This was back when I started my telecommunications company, and again later when I started a different company. So I went back and I shored that up first, and I made sure that I was paying myself first. I took care of my health, and everything at work started getting better as well, and the stress and all that stuff started to become manageable. It wasn't less stress. I was just stronger in dealing with it. I liken it to lifting weights. If you bench 300 pounds and somebody puts 225 on the bar, you're repping it out.
Right.
But if you bench 100 pounds and somebody puts 225 on the bar, it's going to crush you. I look at stress the same way. You can't avoid stress. This idea of trying to reduce stress. Stress is pretty good, because the bigger you want to grow your business, or the more employees you want to hire, et cetera, it's going to be more stressful, period. But you also have potential to earn a lot more money. If you want to make money, you're going to have to be able to manage to take on and manage more stress. There's just no question about it, whether it's in employees or more customers. You got customer service and all the things that go on behind it. So I've moved around a lot in business over the years, but I haven't done it all at once. I've tried to stay pretty focused on a couple of key things, and then try to take care of myself behind the scenes so I was strong enough on a daily basis to do it. I learned a lot from bodybuilding in that regard. And I've said this before, if anybody who has been highly successful in sports, bodybuilding in particular, because it's so meticulous, with the discipline, consistency, and the time management involved in that type of sport, anybody would invest that same level of effort into any income-producing adventure, they'd be a millionaire in 5 years. There's no question. Yeah. So in business, I just kept trying to repeat successful behaviors. How do you find out if it's a successful behavior? Well, you implement it, and the feedback's almost, in bodybuilding and powerlifting, the feedback's almost immediate. You either can lift it or you can't. And then you start to look at what have you done in the last 24, 48 hours or week, because it's so immediate, that has made that better or worse, and then you fix that moving forward. Same thing in business. You wake up every day and you start trying to repeat successful behaviors, and it's the repetition of those over an extended period of time, day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year, decade by decade. That's how we build a bodybuilding career. It's the same way you build a business, is repeating successful behaviors. Along the way, I got lots of great information from lots of really smart, successful people. Not all of it worked for me.
Right.
I said that at the Swiss seminar too. I said, look, what worked for me might not work for you. And what works for most people doesn't necessarily work for everyone. And what it doesn't mean that you can't acquire all this information, apply it, and then kind of discard that which doesn't work, put the rest in your toolbox, and continue to move forward. Some people say, if I work with a particular athlete for an extended period of time, they pretty much have learned everything I have to offer. And then if they move on and train with a different coach, I think that's admirable. I've worked with a lot of different coaches over the year: Mark Bell, Eddie Cohn, Flex Wheeler, Charles Glass. I mean, the list goes on and on. Dave Palumbo, and all of the gurus in the business, certainly some very successful athletes in their own regard. And I've learned something from each of them. And, I'm teaching a lot of things to the people that I work with, and then over time, they'll get information from other people and apply it. I think that it's just constantly learning. And the same thing in business. They say women are more successful in business than men because they ask more questions. If you think you know it all, you're going to have a hard time being successful in any venture.
Definitely. And I think it's really interesting that you brought that up about bodybuilding. I personally, I've talked about it a lot on social media and podcasts about how I've struggled with my mental health. And everybody asked me when I got into bodybuilding, are you afraid of, it affecting that? And I was like, of course it could. But bodybuilding made me very regimented. And like you said, I was able to apply a lot of that to my own business. Because like you said, if you give that amount to everything that you're doing, that's kind of a recipe for success. So when we're thinking about that, is there anything that you do in your day-to-day that you're like, these are my non-negotiables, or like, this is the routine that I have to kind of mitigate this anxiety and stay on the right track with everything that you're kind of juggling at the moment?
Yeah, it's those basics. Sleep is huge. It's the number one. And as I started to get heavier and started to suffer from sleep apnea, I got a CPAP. It's one of the first things I do with my clients. How's your sleep? And, we'll find out what's the... obviously, I have a sleep hygiene protocol, and we try and use the Stop Bang questionnaire to identify sleep apnea. Usually it's just ask the wife or girlfriend, does he snore? And when you're talking about a Hafthor or a Shaw or a Lane Johnson, all these guys well north of 300 pounds, it's like, of course they do.
Yeah.
But I was surprised, shocked that none of them were wearing CPAPs. Dan Green, same way. You get these guys with these big, thick necks. Even Jordan Fagenbaum from Barbell Medicine, who's 198 pounds, wears the CPAP. He has a thick neck from training.
Wow, okay.
And it has to do with neck girth, and that can crowd the airway. It can be just muscle. That's not always associated with obesity, but generally you get north of 240, 250, if you're not, already a big-framed individual, and have a big neck from weightlifting, you probably need, a CPAP. Sleep's the most important thing, and then the environment at home, trying to keep the kids and the dogs out of bed. They're going to wake you up all night, and trying to sleep for at least 7+ hours, and cool room, quiet room, dark room, and a host of other tips that we use to try and optimize sleep. First and foremost, avoiding blue light in the evening, et cetera, and phones and TVs. And then after that, obviously, the nutrition is a really critical point. And I've struggled with diet all my life. I've had severe gastric distress from certain foods. And I've noticed that that's the bulk of the clients that I work with in this industry, both the chronic dieters, which is probably caused by all the chronic dieting.
Right.
And the bulkers, because they're in there eating pizza, pasta, and pancakes,
So
and massive amounts of calories, and on the toilet all the time. It's one of the first things Brian Shaw said to me after working with him for about a week. He said, Stan, I'm hungry. He goes, I haven't been hungry in years. Because he's constantly trying to shovel massive amounts of calories in, but not paying particular attention to whether or not those calories are easily digested and how they affect stool quality, et cetera. And so that's a huge one. And then the regular exercise, obviously. And, we love to train. And I'm really cautious about when I design a program or prescribe a program for a client, that might not be their cup of tea. We talked about it in terms of athletes. Sometimes they don't really like lifting necessarily. So you got to kind of find a way to get what, you want them to do, but also make it enjoyable for them. And so you got to find a way to, these are all just tools in here. You got to get them into the gym and try and find a way that they can enjoy it. Otherwise, it's not going to be sustainable. I don't give any of my clients 40-minute treadmill sessions. I don't give any of them. It's not necessarily terribly effective for weight loss. More exercise, not equal more weight loss. The compensation problem occurs where you go in and you start crushing yourself in workouts. Next thing you know, you go home and you sit more and eat more. So it affects your non-exercise activity. It's kind of a zero-sum game. So I don't assign those just because they're not sustainable or enjoyable. So I do the 10-minute walks. And take a walk after every meal. It has so many more benefits in terms of postprandial glycemia, your blood glucose elevations and durations, we call the area under the curve. Improves digestion, obviously kind of recharges your battery in terms of mental health. Great, if you're walking fast enough with a little arm swing, it's going to be great for cardiovascular fitness as well. But the biggest thing is they're easy to comply with. They're sustainable. You can get 30, 40 minutes of cardio a day pretty easily, just walking the kids to school in the morning and taking a walk after lunch and once at night before you go to bed. If the weather doesn't permit, then you get a recumbent bike, and I have one in my family room. And even my 92-year-old pops, he'll come out with his little walker, and he'll sit on the bike, and he'll ride the bike like this, no tension. He's just spinning. And he does really well as a result. He's 92, and he's in fantastic health. His heart and everything is all tests out great all the time. So I use those methods with all my clients. And then obviously the weightlifting, which we enjoy. I try and get some sort of resistance work into all of their programs. But that's my basic for stress. I know some people use deep breathing. Dr. Andy Galpin is a big fan of even like post-workout or certainly before bed to do some deep breathing just to kind of lower your heart rate, help relax yourself a couple times a day, maybe only 5 minutes, 10 minutes of deep breathing. Some people meditate, what have you. But those are the big rocks for just kind of calming yourself down and dealing with stress.
Is there anything, do you do any of those kind of meditation or like down regulation, self-care type of activities?
Yeah, I don't really. I'm generally a pretty upbeat guy, as you may have noticed. I kind of stick, I believe, and this might be for everybody, but there's only so much time and energy I have in a day. I've said we have minimal, limited physical capital, but I try and focus on the big rocks. Most of the things that I give to people, I give them in a checklist because that's the way I think. I have a checklist at home that I utilize. I just print it out on the computer, and it has the days of the month across the top, and it has a list of things down the side that I like to comply with every single day. And those are usually the big rocks. And I track how many hours of sleep, what I weighed in the morning, 10-minute walks, usually meals, workouts. I kind of just a real quick checklist. So I can glance at it, and this is for compliance. I have all my clients send me the same list every day. Hours of sleep, weight in the morning, 10-minute walks, pictures of each meal you eat. I want to see that on a daily basis. Not for my information, it's really for their compliance. And as long as they start tracking that, then I find that they become more compliant as a result. They're paying attention to those things. And so I like to put things kind of in a hierarchy of most important to least important. I really believe that the sleep, the nutrition, the regular exercise is the top of the deal. And then below that, it's a matter of personal preference, those things that you feel work for you or that you need, whether it's the breathing technique or meditating or something like that. I think that's fine to add to the list. I said, if you could see, I'm trying to differentiate between the things, what I call the most meaningful, the 99% rule, I call it, the things that have the biggest impact. I said on Mark Bell's podcast one time many years ago, I said, if you're religiously taking your little 5-gram thimble-sized scooper of creatine every single day and sleeping 5 hours a night, you're a fucking idiot.
Yeah, what are you doing?
And so I'm trying to focus on the big rocks, and everything else for me, if you want to throw it in there, but don't sacrifice something that we know is really critical. I say majoring in the minors is a common term that people refer to it as. And so not suggesting that those other stress management skills are minor, but they are minor in comparison to the big items that I just mentioned.
Definitely. And I think a really important thing there with your checklist is that people are taking accountability for themselves again, which I don't think is, as big as we think it is. We are very conscious of it as health professionals and fitness and everything like that. But, we get clients who they have no idea how much they're sleeping, how much they're walking. And I think just that aspect of taking more accountability and being more aware and conscious of what you're doing day in and day out, that itself makes a huge difference, which I'm sure you see with these lists.
Yeah. 100%. And some people don't like tracking necessarily. And I think we see from a lot of the research on the little, I like people to do their step counter because as you diet and you start losing weight, you start compensating. I mentioned you start moving less. That'd be a great way to try and hold the line, just to know if you took 8,000 steps a day or 10,000 or whatever your number is. Obviously we just try to grow that week over week until we get to a number that's pretty sustainable and has sufficient benefit. It has a satiety benefit as well as cardiovascular benefit. But if you're not tracking it, how do you know? A lot of people don't like trying to weigh and measure their food either. But at least initially, the same way you budget your bank account, you got to kind of know how much your income and expenses are, or you have a hard time succeeding. And then after that, maybe they'll implement a strategy. And I've always said that all diets work when they're strictly adhered to. And the best diet's the one that you'll follow, and there's many paths to the same destination. So I have clients that do keto, I have clients that intermittent fast, I have clients that are vegans, I have clients that like paleo for any number of reasons, but we know that a plan is better than no plan, and so I'm not opposed to them selecting any of those things, just understanding that if they're successful, it's because they created a calorie deficit, and it was the least restrictive to them. They were able to comply with that diet, and I'm fine with that. Experiment a little bit. If by skipping, a meal every day, you eat less calories, great, if you can comply with that. If by eliminating an entire food group, such as keto and limiting carbs, and you can comply with that. And then I caution them that there are some potential downsides to those things, but that's kind of further down the list in terms of order of importance, particularly if the individual presents and they're significantly overweight and have, say, type 2 diabetes or, significantly elevated blood pressure or, LDLs, those are the kind of things, that's a triage situation. You want to get in and see, how much of a difference can we make in this in as short a period of time as possible, and then educate them along the way to how to maintain that long term, because weight loss is actually pretty easy, I should say. Most people lose weight when they go on a diet. Mm-hmm. The vast majority of them gain it back. So weight loss maintenance is where we focus long term. But initially, if somebody's got 190 systolic blood pressure, I got to get them down quick, because that's an immediate problem.
That's a problem.
And so we'll dive in and figure out whatever program they can comply with for 2 weeks or a month to try and lose 10 or 20 pounds. But that's not a long-term solution. And we see this in the research as well. 800-calorie liquid diet turned out to be the most effective for reversing type 2 diabetes and NAFLD in the short term. I'm not saying that's sustainable long term, but there are clients who present that may need that kind of intervention, at least initially. The problem when I say things like this is, people start to extrapolate.
But what about this?
Yeah, and that's when all the whatabouts come in. And look, I'm just telling you that what the research says, and that the individuals present with different needs at different times. But in long term, we'll try and design something that they can easily comply with. It becomes part of a sustainable lifestyle, and that's why I'm cautious about being too over restrictive long term, because if people don't enjoy it, they're not going to stick to it.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. And with the variety of clients that you work with, what is your favorite part about being a coach? I mean, you make so many impacts on their diets and their deep health. What do you feel really passionate about? What do you love to do about, being a coach?
Yeah, I mean, you just hit the nail on the head. You make a big impact. And if people experience it, a lot of people can't see what they can't see. They've never felt like we feel, because they haven't exercised regularly and eaten healthy, mostly whole foods. And I'm not suggesting that to eliminate everything. I kind of like Alan Aragon's flexible dieting information. But generally speaking, when somebody loses weight and starts to feel great, and can do more things and have more energy and start to actually see lowering LDLs, that can cause a lot of stress for people. I get people sending me blood work and they're like freaked out because, they think they're going to die of a heart attack tomorrow. We know it's a long-term disease, but we also know there's things we can do today to reduce the likelihood and just kind of relieve them of some of that stress. Obviously, blood pressure is a big one, and just more energy. Some people with the thyroid problems who don't even, maybe not even realize why they're tired all the time and just sitting. And that's the feedback that I get. And like I said, I've traveled all over the world. I've shaken thousands of hands, and people always want to come up and kind of tell you about a particular thing that maybe they heard from you that they implemented, and it changed their life. And that, every time I get discouraged by looking at the big picture of our declining health over time and the obesity epidemic and all that, when someone comes up, an individual comes up and says that you changed their life, that kind of gets it, recharges your battery, and you just keep. And so I've actually stopped focusing so much on public policy, because I'm simply not qualified, to be honest with you. I read all of the information out there in terms of what impact you can have on obesity in general. I did an obesity rant many years ago about my wife growing up in Samoa, and of course we know that they have a huge problem with obesity in Samoa. And it's been studied for many years by Brown University, and my wife grew up in Western Samoa. They made all their own food. They had chickens and pigs, and they had taro root, and they went out to the ocean and they harvested everything they could, and they ate all their own food, and they had no obesity in their family. Then they all moved to American Samoa together. And they had a vibrant marketplace in Western Samoa where all the families, 3 or 4 generations, would come and sell all the things that they had grown and made, and there was a lot of barter and trade. And then they moved to American Samoa, and American Samoa had food stamps. So now they all everybody used their food stamps to go down and buy, the highly processed, ultra palatable foods at the market or at the store there, which was basically sugar, white flour, and oils, and they would just make those foods. and they stopped growing their own. And she started seeing around, even in her own family and all of her community, the obesity over the years. And her father ultimately died of complications of diabetes, the black feet and the whole 9 yards. So it was tragic. And it I'm at a loss. I think, generally speaking, most people are at a loss. I had this argument with the folks on a podcast recently, and they were like, "Oh, you're responsible for yourself." And true, that is true. But it doesn't appear as though we're going to make any progress on that without some sort of intervention on the food choices or the accessibility of those foods. And it goes down to socioeconomic position, food availability, or excess. It's just a much broader conversation that I've started to avoid.
Oh, it's a tough one.
I'm not going to change the world that way.
Right.
But I can help individuals who I can touch and can work with me, or maybe hear some of the information that I put out and apply it, and hopefully. And we have a lot of other people doing a great job of that. Dr. Lane Norton's and his whole group, Joey Munoz. There's a whole host of people out there giving, I think, really great information that people are starting to learn that there's about all of the myths associated with dieting and the fad diets and the crash dieting. And I think they're starting to learn that, at least those that tune in that want to change. And I can't have an effect on people who don't want it. Obviously, you can't help people who don't want to help themselves.
Right, of course.
But it does take lots of help.
With the dieting, you have the meal prep, right? Where does that ship? Is that everywhere?
Yeah, nationwide. And I say about that, it's convenient and it tastes good. There's no magic to it. I do try and design the diet so they have a 2-to-1 protein to fat ratio. I do think that some macro setups are more ideal for weight loss. When you control for calories and protein, where you put carbs and fats really doesn't matter.
Right.
But I like to keep the protein relatively high. We know that's better for satiation, for lean mass retention, has the higher thermic effect of foods. You net out fewer calories than you consume of, say, a comparable amount of carbohydrate or fat. And so it's just convenient. Mostly, I said earlier, I go from information to application. I prep my meals and I put them in a thermos. Or when I travel, I'll grab my meal prep and out of the freezer, and I'll put it into my bag. And wherever I fly, now I've got a stack of meal prep.
Easy.
And it's super easy. Even when I go internationally, I'll put 30 of them into a rolling Coleman cooler and check it on the plane.
Wow,
And then
okay.
wherever I land, I've got a whole week's meals. I just stay someplace with a fridge and a microwave.
That's all you need.
That's all I need. And I've got all my meals right there. And, I find in those situations, I actually save money and time because they're convenient, and going out to a restaurant would cost significantly more than the meal that you'd have. And so you get up in the morning, I travel to do seminars. I'll take maybe a couple of thermos with me for the day's travel. When I went to Moscow, I took 5, because that's a 22-hour day.
Yes.
Between layovers and customs and getting to your hotel. I had 5 of these thermos just like this, full of hot meals, and I put them into my bag that I carried on and stuffed under my seat. So about every 4 hours, I still have to eat on about a 4-hour clock. I still maintain a reasonable amount of mass, and I train pretty hard, and so I need plenty of calories to support this what I call it, being a victim of your own circumstance. And so
That's a good way to put
I take this with me, and I'll eat those meals, and while other people are foraging for peanuts and chips on the pretzels on the plane. And then obviously when I get there, I've got the frozen meals that I can eat throughout the week. And so for that, it's good. And even when I'm home, when I'm making breakfast, I'll make 3 breakfasts, and I'll put 2 into thermos, and I'll just set them on the counter. Now, if I got to go pick the kids up at school, or I got to take them to, gymnastics or something after school, I'm not likely to go to Carl's Jr. Now, I couldn't anyhow. I mentioned earlier, I've always had trouble digesting certain foods. I'll get severe gastric distress from some foods, and just feel really shitty. And so I've said that I don't eat foods I like. I eat foods that like me, and I make that decision about an hour after I eat. And it's immediate feedback. And sometimes I just pay the price.
Right.
When I go down to Venice, I go to the Firehouse, and I get those pancakes with the blueberry and the banana compote inside, not on top.
Man, that
inside,
sounds good.
And I pay the price. But you know what?
That one's worth it.
At least I know, and I just make sure I'm near a bathroom an hour later. and that's part of my trip. I've been doing that since I've been going down there since the late 80s or early 90s, which I mean to blather on, but it reminds me of when you mentioned, we were talking about Brad Schoenfeld and all the research. Brad has been great about always saying the bros were right. From as far back as the first time I went to Gold's Venice, I'd take a road trip. I'd drive all the way from Eugene, Oregon, where I was in college at the University of Oregon, all the way down to Venice, and I would watch and ask questions and get a workout in. And they all trained twice a week. They all did pretty high volume, lots of reps and trained every body part twice a week, trained twice a day. They would do AM, PM workouts. They would eat like 5 or 6 times a day, every single one of these guys that I would ask. There was the occasional, the mensers, they'd be like, oh yeah, you just one workout a week or whatever. I don't think that's how they got that way. That may have been what they preached later in their career, but almost every single one of them that I talked to was training twice a day, eating 6 times a day, napping every afternoon, sleeping 8-9 hours a night, and training with reasonably high volume in the gym. So I just, as an aside, I think that the most successful people in every sport, there's a lot to be learned from them. Having said that, a lot of people are successful in spite of themselves, and they do a lot of crazy things that you do, like I mentioned Hoffman Burnson never wearing a CPAP. That's completely foreign to me that he could survive, all those years, and Shaw and the rest of them. So sometimes there's just gaping holes, and they're successful in spite of themselves because they're obviously very genetically gifted, but they're also very hardworking. So anyhow, I don't know how that came of the meal prep question, but this is what happens when you interview me. I just blather on.
I think it's good. Well, and I think what you said, the bros are right, is really important because as we're seeing in social media, there's so much information out that it's kind of crippling at times. There's a lot of these guys who are the biomechanics guys, and while that information is so useful, the newbie in the gym doesn't need to worry about their elbow and the angle and whatever when you're saying like the bros are right. We have to have this combination of both. Is that anything that you struggle with right now in your business of these people that are trying to be too nuanced to a fault?
It's interesting that you say that. If I struggle with my clients, I call it the shiny object syndrome. Every time they get on social media, they see somebody doing something, especially when it's somebody who's good at something. Mm-hmm. Like Conor McGregor, for a while there, he was walking around doing funny stuff on the floor because somebody told him that doing funny stuff on the floor was going to help his performance. I think it's complete nonsense. And there's a lot of things like that out there now, and I call it the shiny object syndrome. I believe we have one responsibility as strength and conditioning coaches, and that's to make our athletes stronger and better conditioned and not hurt them. And there, again, is a hierarchy of things that you can do, and by hurting, I can also mean over-fatiguing them so that they're able to go out and perform their sport or their practice. And I think that's a very short list of things. Again, they're all tools. You can pick from a variety of different things. They don't have to squat, but they can use an SSB bar. They can box squat. They can use, a belt squat, whatever, as long as they're continually challenging and getting stronger. And it should be a few things. It should be measurable. It should be progressible. And it should be transferable. And we don't do that with functional fitness stuff. Transferable doesn't mean you do sport-specific movements.
Right.
It just means that if you get somebody stronger at a particular movement, that it improves their performance on the field, which is usually seen whether they can run faster, jump higher, or throw further. And so we keep it pretty simple that way. Now, anything that gets them there is fine with me, but some things don't do that as well as others. And again, now we're back to what is your client, what are they willing to do, or what are they invested in to do hard enough to affect a response? So, yeah, there's a lot of distractions now. There's a lot of people coming out with these new, I don't want to name anybody in particular, but there's plenty out there.
I think the shiny object syndrome is a very aptly named way to call that. It's pretty accurate. I don't want to take up too much of your time. It has been amazing to speak with you, but you've got so many things going on. So how can people work with you? People can come. This is an open gym, yes? Anyone come here?
We've got a key fob downstairs, but you can come join us here. There's a lot going on right now. The Olympia is in 3 weeks.
Yep.
We've got a 3,000 square foot rhino cage, and we're doing world's strongest gym. We're having gyms come from all over the country and compete against each other in squat, bench, and deadlift. We're also bringing in just an unbelievable list of fantastic young lifters. Can't you say all young? There's some older guys too. They're going to lift as an exhibition. We're also bringing in some fantastic arm wrestlers, Eric Spoto, Michael Todd, and some others, so that people in the audience can see what it feels like to lock up with a freak like that. So that's coming up soon.
Will that be on the weekend during the convention?
Yeah, that's in the expo. So you can come by and see these guys lifting. You can see teams of some of the more popular gyms come by and watch them. All the schedule up later this week, so you can see who's lifting when and what gyms, and so it'd be kind of fun to see. The Vertical Diet 4.0, it started out originally, some almost 6 years ago, Vertical Diet 1.0, and then I put out the 2, and then the 3.0, and now the 4.0 is coming out here in just next week. They're free to anybody who's bought a previous version. I update them with more information. As we mentioned earlier, science changes, or I get questions from people that weren't previously answered, and so I just keep expanding on it, and now it'll be north of 250 pages. I'm working on a book right now with Ben Pollack.
Oh, wow.
Who's an IFBB Pro and World Record Powerlifter. He's a freak. He moved here to Vegas recently, and we're collaborating on Biggs University, and that's going to be for the dark side. It's going to be from folks who have gone through some of the performance-enhancing side of the sport, and we're going to try and educate them on how to do that as responsibly as possible and put out that kind of information as well. And then Vertical Kids is the next book that I've already been working on, where we from kindergarten to college, I say from conception to college, teaching parents and kids how to eat and exercise. I run the Kids Power Hour every Sunday. Tomorrow at 11 is the next one. We got over 20 kids that come in, and they're from 5 years old up to teenagers in high school, and they learn to squat, bench, and deadlift, and I take them through actual workouts. They go through, and I try and get them to lift about as much as they can with good form for 5 reps. We go through it 3 times, squat, bench, deadlift, and maybe some open gym, and finish with chin-ups at the end. But the American Academy of Pediatrics says it is, and I quote, essential for adolescents to lift weights. It absolutely helps with their strength development, but also prevents injury in other sports. And so we're implementing a program for that as well. And that's the big stuff. And all that can be found at stanefferding.com. That's where I have a link to the meal prep company. The Vertical Diet, obviously, is theverticaldiet.com or verticaldiet.com. They all point to my meal prep company, where we deliver meals nationwide, including the famous Monster Mash. Yep, that's the ground beef with white rice and some scrambled egg and some potatoes and rice. Mix all that up together. It's delicious. And that's all at Stan Efferding. Also on YouTube at Stan Efferding, I've got a bunch of rants that I've done for a number of years that have been very popular, a lot of information in there. And then Instagram is Stan Efferding as well. And we'll see what happens in the next month or two with my prep for CT Fletcher's deadlift.
I'm excited for
appearance.
that.
Yeah, it's just an exhibition. There's going to be guys that are pulling 900 pounds. I do what I can. I call it my either my PR, my post-retirement PR, or my AARP PR. Now that I'm an old guy, we'll see what I can do.
Oh, that's awesome. And what day is that? January, you said?
I don't know exactly when the Iron Wars is, but he does it every year. Has some freaks come down there and do some monstrous stuff. It's awesome.
That's awesome. And you work with Merrick as well. Do you have a code for them?
Stan Efferding. Yeah, 10% off at Merrick. If you go to stanefferding.com and scroll down to blood test, it'll take you, and click the link, it'll take you directly to Merrick, to my customized, the affordable one that I talked about, which after my discount comes to $140 for a very comprehensive test.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, Dan. It's been a pleasure to talk with you and an honor. Can't wait to see you in your exhibition, but I'm excited for the Olympia weekend. That'll be crazy. But thanks again. It's great to have you.
I appreciate you having me.